friends, it's Carrie. Welcome back to my channel. Thanks for joining me. I did want to do a weekly wrap-up video this week. I know I'm a little bit late doing so, but I needed to finish a book, and I do have two books to talk about this week. The first one I listened to is an audio book, and it was called Escape from Camp 14, One Man's Remarkable Odyssey from North Korea to Freedom in the West by Blaine Harden. This young man, his name was Shin. He was actually born in Camp 14. His parents were allowed to get married as kind of a reward in Camp 14, and so he was the product of that marriage. And so being born in Camp 14, he was unaware of Pyongyang. He was unaware of any sort of life outside of Camp 14, and he wasn't brainwashed to love Kim Jong-il or worship the dear leader. So Shin's perspective is a little bit different than a lot of the political prisoners that I've read about or seen in documentary films. So it was very interesting to read from his perspective. Wasn't raised in a loving home. He really just saw his mother as competition for food. And this, I kind of hesitate to say this, but this kind of worked to his advantage while he lived in Camp 14, because he didn't suffer from a lot of the guilt and sadness and regret that a lot of the political prisoners who were coming from the outside and would suffer when they had to do horrendous things in Camp 14 in order to survive. And so Shin, being born in Camp 14, he didn't have a lot of those kind of same mentalities that outsiders did have. Of course, later on in his life, Shin would suffer a lot of the, kind of mental repercussions of growing up without those basic human connections and those familial bonds. And like a lot of defectors, Shin has a really hard time assimilating. I had mixed feelings about reading this book from the author's perspective instead of reading it straight from Shin's perspective, but I don't think you should discount this book for that reason. There were several events that occurred in the camp that were kind of racked Shin with guilt, and that caused him to kind of have different versions of those events over time. And so I think the author was able to provide a little bit of perspective around those events, particularly dealing with the execution of Shin's mother and brother, because Shin actually informed on his mother and brother, which wasn't uncommon, and obviously anybody in that particular circumstance probably would do the exact same thing. That's what you were trained to do, and that's what you have to do in order to survive. I think the author was able to speak on some things that Shin experienced, and also Shin's inability to adjust to society right now that Shin may have had a hard time discussing. And so that may have been one reason that instead of using Shin's translation of his own account, the author's version of this tale was used instead. So I would definitely recommend this book. I think it gives us a different perspective of the camps in North Korea. And something else to keep in mind is that, these camps have been around a lot longer than the, Soviet gulags or the Nazi concentration camps. And we don't actually know how many North Korean citizens are in these camps. So it's pretty scary, because there are international organizations that try to kind of estimate how many people are in these camps, and there are ranges between 200,000 and 500,000 people. We're not sure. And I do believe that when Kim Jong-un took over from Kim Jong-il, the population in these camps dramatically increased. So who's to say how many people are in these camps currently? I'll try to find some articles on these camps and link them in the description box if I'm able to. The second book that I read this week was The Revolution of Marina M by Janet Fitch. And this was the book that I won from Summer. and this was amazing. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I will say this book is a huge commitment because it is part of a series. So if you're not willing to commit to this character, I wouldn't suggest you get started, because you're not going to get all the answers at the end of this book. If you're looking for a nice, neat little storyline that's all wrapped up at the end, that's not what you're going to get with this book. And this book is 800 pages long, so it is quite a commitment, but it is an epic saga. I was so invested in this character, I didn't care that it was that long. Marina is part of the bourgeois class in Tsarist Russia on New Year's Eve in 1916. And she's a teenage poet. She's a dreamer. She believes in herself, she believes in her family, she believes in her country, and at some point in this book, they all let her down. This book covers the most transformative, volatile period in Russian history. So we're covering the Russian Revolution during World War I, and Marina goes against her family to join the Bolsheviks. This book does an excellent job of providing insight into that conflict, which is a very multifaceted conflict, and it definitely puts a human face to it. You're introduced to a lot of different characters, and you get to understand their reasoning for the revolution. And I like the way they describe it. And some of them describe themselves as kind of futurist. And so you get kind of an insight into why some of these people are doing these horrendous things and how they can kind of rationalize it as for the future, so they kind of see themselves as futurists and how they are doing it for their future selves or their future generations. And Marina kind of sees herself as this dreamer, this poet, but she also cares about the here and now. And she starts to realize, she starts to look around, and she's starting to see some things that she just can't agree with. The book shows the changing nature of the revolution, how the war factored into it, and also the struggle between the industrial workers and the peasants. I'm going to link a couple of articles and videos in the description box about the Russian Revolution, and you don't have to understand everything about that era of history to read this book, because like I said, the book does an excellent job of kind of hitting all of the highlights. So you don't have to have a grand background knowledge of it to read this book, but I will link a few things in the description box if you're interested. Marina's love life in this book is extremely well played. Sometimes historical fiction can get a little cheesy when it comes to the love stories, but sometimes her encounters are about sheer survival, and I liked that. Even when she's torn between two lovers in this book, it's extremely believable. She's a real person. She hurts people and she gets hurt. I also like the way women were portrayed in this book. I felt like it recognized their status at the time and also acknowledged how hard their role was and what they had to do just to make it. So many things happen in this book. It has a war, it has a revolution, it has a kidnapping, it has a love triangle, it has a cult, it has intrigue, it has poetry. I mean, what more can you want? I also like the fact that the book included some of Marina's poetry, and this one kind of stuck out to me. This one's entitled Insomnia. My window gazes onto night, alone and sleepless, starry. Down Verkshtakaya, a single light shines from the topmost story. Who is this comrade untouched by sleep? Does she rock a newborn baby? Does she pine for love and weep? Does she mourn for vanished beauty? Another soul who can't find peace. I will not douse my light and keep them in emptiness to pass the wine dark night. As blissful souls drift blissfully inside their peaceful homes. Dear stranger, you and I must ply our oars till morning comes. I don't know, I just like that one because I could totally envision in my mind these two people, sitting up at night, while everyone else was asleep, and just kind of that connection. Because one of the things that you'll see about Marina is that she's kind of drifting throughout the book, and she's kind of apart. You know, even though she's with people and she has people around her, she's always kind of apart, and she hasn't quite found her place yet, I don't think. Maybe she has, but I'm not sure yet. So I really enjoyed this one. I would highly recommend it. Again, it's 800 pages and it is part of a series, so unless you're willing to invest your time in it, I don't know that you're going to want to dive into it, but I would definitely recommend it. So let me know if you guys have read this one. Let me know what you thought. Let me know what you're reading. Shoot me a comment. Hope you guys are having a great week, and I'll see you in my next video, hopefully.